All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm from PsychSIGN and co-hosting this wonderful panel of recently matched applicants with the AACAP Medical Student and Resident Committee. So I'm joined by several amazing people. So please, can we just kind of start with your introductions, maybe say your name and what school you're at, where you'll be going for residency, and anything else you'd like to share. We'll start with Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm currently a medical student at the University of Iowa, and I will be going to the University of Kentucky for residency. And I couples matched, so that's maybe a little extra detail.
Great. Celina? Great. Celina?
Hi y'all, I'm Celina Salcido.
I'm Celina Salcido.
UIW in San Antonio, so Incarnate Word, and I am going to UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, and I'm on the rural track. So if you guys have any questions specifically about that.
And we'll do Miles.
Hi everyone, my name is Miles. I'm currently a medical student at University of California, Riverside School of Medicine, and I matched at Charles Drew in LA County. So if you guys have any questions, I applied pretty strategic to location and mostly California and West Coast. So any questions regarding that, you can always feel free to ask me.
Great, and then Juliette.
Hi, I'm Juliette. I'm currently at the University of Florida, and I matched at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. I applied to like general psych programs and child integrated, so I can answer questions about that, or just like moving to a different region I could also talk about.
Great, thank you so much. So let's start with our first question. What general factors were you looking for in applying to residency? This could include geographic preference, the call schedule, fellowships, location, prestige, kind of what were the things that you initially were thinking about when you were choosing what programs to apply to? Let's start with Celina, and I'll kind of, from there, you can kind of jump in as you'd like.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So I guess I should have prefaced I'm also a non-traditional applicant. So I'm a older lady. I'm 32 years old. So I wanted to go back home. So the biggest thing was heading back to Dallas, which thank goodness I got it there. But really all of Texas, New Mexico, and Louisiana was really what I was looking for. So I could stay close to family.
Okay, anyone can jump in.
I think initially for me, in couples matching, I had to apply very broadly. So I tried to not be too selective in initially in applying to residencies, but a couple of things that were like important for me was one, I really wanted to be in an academic program. I have like an interest in research, and so I just wanted to be among people who had that interest as well. And then I also kind of perused the Doximity comments that people had about the program, just to kind of highlight any programs that I was maybe on the edge about initially, and then saw maybe some like multiple bad experiences from people, and that would be enough for me to like cross them off the list.
I also tried to do some digging about like kind of like what were the vibes at programs I was super interested in. But another thing for me was location. I have family kind of scattered around, so I knew I could move a lot, but I grew up in a major metropolitan area. I grew up in South Florida, if there's anybody from South Florida here. And then I went to a college town for undergrad and med school. And then I was kind of like, I want to go back to metropolitan area. Like I like all the diversity that you get with like patients and just things to do outside of medicine. That was really important for me to like kind of go back to that for residency. So that was almost like my number one factor I was looking at was location personally.
Yeah, I just want to echo all the other answers. Mine was definitely location based. My partner's in LA County, so I want to stay local to Southern California, but I also still have family scattered across the West Coast as well. Another thing that I wanted to look for, I knew I wanted to apply child psych, like a big draw for me going into psychiatry was eventually applying child psychiatry. So I wanted to look for programs that have an affiliation with strong child psychiatry rotations or also a fellowship attached to their residency program.
Great, thank you so much. Those are all similar things that I looked at in the process. So, what were some things that surprised you about the application process? I know this is a pretty broad question, but if there's anything you can, share, and maybe I'll start with Juliette.
So I'm also very like big on child psych. So that was also something I was looking at. So something that had surprised me is that like I had gotten advice, like I got mixed advice about being upfront about like, oh, I'm interested in child, like I already know I'm going to do child psych because I don't know, people are always like, oh, I guess programs have people that come in that say they want to do child psych and then change their mind and don't do it. So like every time I said I'm interested in child psych, I always got like a, oh, like, are you going to change your mind? Like, are you sure? And I was like, no, I'm sure. So that was like one thing that was surprising me, but I really got like a really nice positive overall, like a positive response to me wanting to do child psych. So that was also pleasant because I wasn't sure what reaction I was going to get. Um, Everyone was so nice. That's what I was like pleasantly surprised.
I think something very weirdly surprising, I guess, for me was on your ARIS application at the beginning, you list your hometown, and there's, I think, a maximum of 5 hometowns. And so in my mind, being able to explain everywhere that I had lived for any period of time would have been helpful for me in terms of like justifying like locations that I was applying to. So I listed where I grew up and then like 3 other places that I had lived since, during college and then after college for me and medical school. And that approach seemed to really confuse some people in a way, like almost like, right, that was like the first question that some people would ask me was like, so like, how did you end up in all of these different locations? And it was just like such an unnecessarily confusing thing. And I wish I had just labeled one hometown. So consider that.
And I think for myself, I didn't realize how time intensive it was going to be. So what I did was really put it into bite-sized pieces and work on it really early. So that would be probably the biggest thing is start as early as you can, especially if not necessarily you're a procrastinator, but you have a lot of other things going on, especially with your rotations and what have you. So just be kind to yourself and make sure that you have that time.
That's really helpful. As someone who procrastinated a lot of it, I wish that were the case for me. So, we asked the program directors about, what they view to be important in a personal statement. I'm curious about what you felt was important in your process of writing personal statement to share any insights on how you approached that and how you eventually said, I'm done, this is good, I'm going to submit this version. We'll start with Miles.
Sorry, my dog. So I think I actually went through multiple revisions of a personal statement and then ended up scrapping one and then starting over multiple times. But the first, I actually received advice early on saying that they want to hear more about what my goals are and how it matches like psychiatry and programs. So here I was drafting this personal statement, much more about like future oriented goals and things. And then when I submitted it to some of my reviewers, they're like, but I don't know enough about you and your past. And I was like, but I thought you wanted to know about my future. Oh, so I was like, okay, let's rework that. And then so I ended up kind of referring back to my medical school personal statement and seeing a little bit of my journey on how I got to this point as a medical student first, and then tying that into what I wanted as like future goals and such. And I think after you combine, more so for me, a timeline of longevity, that created much more of a cohesive story. And I think a lot of my reviewers said at that point, okay, like I know who you are leading up to this point, and I know what you're going to be as a resident moving forward. And I think this is the personal statement that's going to take you there. So that's just kind of my journey writing the personal statement.
Mine took multiple iterations. I think I felt like I kept revising it and revising it, and I just internally didn't feel very satisfied. And like one night after, I think having like a lot of time to work on it was really important for me, because there were periods of times I could put it away and just like maybe a week at a time. And then like one night I hadn't worked on it for a while, and it like this whole story of from my childhood hit me. And it was a really great experience that I could kind of start the whole essay off with, and it was able to tie in a lot of my prior drafts together, but it felt much more personal. And yeah, so having lots of time for many drafts was critical.
I agree. I also used the approach of like starting off with like a childhood story and then like kind of just like describing my journey, and then I got the same advice as Miles as to like talk about like your goals and what you're looking for in a residency program. So that was like kind of my general template. I went like childhood story, then like undergrad, med school, and then conclusion paragraph of like what I'm looking for in a residency. I had tons of drafts. I remember at the beginning, I only had like my intro and the conclusion, and like the whole middle part of the personal statement was blank. But I had met with like my counselor. Every single one of my letter writers looked at a draft and gave suggestions. I had my dad look. He's kind of like my non-medical person that always looks at my stuff. So I think getting like good eyes to look at it, but not too many eyes, because everyone's going to have a different opinion. Like, don't send it to like 20 people, because they're all going to say something different and you're going to get so overwhelmed. And if someone says to change something, but like you really feel strongly about keeping it, like keep it. One of my not letter writers, but someone who had looked at it had told me like to take out the childhood story. I was like, no, I really want to keep it. And I did. And every single PD that interviewed me mentioned it. So I was happy I kept it. So yes, get people to look at it, but also be wary of how many people you get, because they might all tell you conflicting things, basically.
And just how my colleagues have mentioned, since I was non-traditional, I kind of used it as an historical perspective as to why I kind of changed my previous career into this. So it was really giving the whole cliche of be yourself. And you're going to hear that all throughout this whole thing, because really you have to show how you are in a program, because they don't want you to put on a face and pretend you're somebody else, because you will ultimately be the person that's seeing the patient, that's being an intern, that's doing all this stuff. So definitely that part. And then as Juliette said, please don't allow a lot of people to look at it, because I think once you have so many hands in that cookie jar, it no longer becomes you. So just make sure you remain true to yourself, and that piece of paper is really just an extension of you.
I like that, being authentic to who you are and also making sure it's like your voice. Great. So regarding personal statements, there's also the activities section, and I'm curious if there was anything you thought about with your activities section in terms of trying to vary it, or kind of how you wrote it. I know that's something that people think about sometimes. Also, just FYI, for our class, we did not have a hobby section, but the incoming applicants will have a hobby section. we can start with Celina.
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you brought up that point, Julia. So they didn't have a hobby section. So one of my activities, I did talk about my hobbies. And I will say that that got a lot of attention. So make sure that you really have interesting hobbies. But for my activities, I really try to kind of highlight specific areas. If it continues with the same way that it was like you could drop down and have like specific characteristics of what each activity, can garner from that. Really try to use each one of those with all your activities. Is it still 10 activities that you can have? I'm not exactly sure, but as many activities as you can, ideally, again, just to paint the picture of who you are holistically.
I agree. I use one of my experiences as a hobby section. I also got asked about my hobbies, and like a hobby can be anything. Like I put Nintendo Switch, like I just put like a bunch of random things. And I had a conversation with a PD because he plays the Nintendo Switch with his son. Like you never know, like it's any of the little things, like just put anything as a hobby, anything you're interested in. It's not like a really strict thing.
Go ahead, Miles.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what everyone was saying. I think a lot of applicants, like as wonderful as we all are, we have really similar things that sound the same, I'm sure, to people reviewing our applications. What president of some club here might be equivalent to president of some club there, and they're not really sure what that means. And I really wish we had a hobby section because I didn't put one. And then when I was asked about it during interviews, I was like, oh, thank God, like I actually like talking about my life outside of, my medical activities so much more. So be prepared to talk about that on your interviews as well if you do have some fun hobbies or things that are interesting.
And I guess like in addition to like other activities, I remember being really nervous that I had maybe 3 activities that were all fell under maybe I think it was wellness, because I did a lot of wellness leadership and I was like, oh my gosh, this is redundant and all of that stuff. But I think in hindsight, the fact that I had multiple activities that actually were related to each other almost just like reflected depth in a particular topic, and that ended up being something that I talked quite a bit about in my interviews. And so I just don't be afraid of that either if you're feeling like you're repeating a lot of similar things.
That's really helpful insight. Thanks. So kind of the next phase of the application is where to apply. How did you all utilize signals? I know that the upcoming applicants will have 10, we had 5, but how did you think about distributing your signals? And we'll talk in the non-recorded section kind of further about that as well. I don't know, let's start with Miles. Thanks.
Yes, so for signals, I would say do a little bit of research. I did 3 away rotation / sub-Is, and they all told me not to signal them, and they were all pretty high on my list for my choices. So I was like, okay, even though I'll be ranking them highly, I did a sub-I there, so I won't have to signal them. My home program told me not to signal them, and my program at UC Riverside were actually attached also to Riverside University Hospital, which is a separate residency, and they told us not to signal them. So certain programs will say don't signal them because they'll probably already offer you an interview just based off of your location or previous relationship with that institution. And so from there, I kind of selected, okay, like what's a program, or I guess at our time we had like 5 signals, was it? What are the 5 programs that I wish, to show interest in that I don't already have a previous relationship with to kind of show additional interest? And that's kind of how I selected my signals. And I also gave it to like one reach school, but they didn't really notice me either after that. That being said, though, I only like of my 5 signals, I think I only heard back from 3 of them. So there's still definitely not going to be like a guaranteed interview there. So those are also some things to take into consideration.
I think Miles brings up a really good point because on my OAs, they all told me that if I wanted a interview, it'd be most ideal to signal them. So really find out wherever you're going on your sub-Is if they want to want you to wave at them or not. You guys have 10, which is twice as better as, twice as many as we had. So I would definitely use them. I use them more so for the schools that I felt were close to home. I will be a geriatric psychiatrist, so that was something also important for me. So that kind of fit into where I saw myself being.
Great. Any other thoughts on signals? Okay. Right. How did you all prepare for interviews, and what was kind of the kind of maybe the most surprising or kind of like most unexpected aspect of interviews? But yeah, let's start with how did you prepare for interviews? Rebecca?
So I'm couples matching, so I think me and my partner did a lot of practice between the two of us as kind of getting in the flow of how we thought our answers would go, and then working on, our little quirks like saying like or whatever. And then I did one in-person practice interview with somebody who interviews students at my program. And then I did another online practice interview with another friend who was applying to a different program. And then honestly, from there, I stopped practicing because what I wanted to do was what everyone told me about applying to psychiatry is that people just want to have a conversation and you really want it to feel genuine. So at the point that I felt like I had some stories that could reliably fit various kind of behavioral type questions, I let it go just so it didn't sound as rehearsed as it could have, I guess. And then in terms of something surprising, I think, we have generally learned interview skills when you're interviewing in person. And I think there are some like extra behavioral things to be aware of when you're interviewing on Zoom, like what's your Zoom background? And I think that like there's different stories on like what's good for that. But I think being thoughtful about like what your Zoom background is, and then also, even if your feet aren't showing in the camera or like there's no one in the room with you, you can notice when people are like swiveling in their chair or maybe like bopping their leg up and down and the computer's moving or things like that. So, as you're preparing for interviews, have those things in mind.
I had gotten a ring light because I thought I would need it. Now, did I really need a ring light? Not really. But it did help because sometimes like you can see like other people's videos, like they're really hard to see. So just make sure like watch your lighting, and yeah, watch your background. For preparing for interviews, my school, our alumni association, every year, like they get alumni who volunteer to interview us. And then on top of that, my psychiatry department at my school did mock interviews. So I had like 2 mock interviews. And then I also agree, like, you don't want to practice too much because you don't want to come off as too rehearsed. You want to come off as like genuine and authentic. Well, hopefully not coming off. You all are genuine and authentic, I'm sure. So yeah, I didn't want to practice too much either. So it allowed like a natural flow of conversation, I think. since I didn't rehearse too much.
Yeah, I'll definitely mirror that. I think I only did 2 mock interviews, one with like our counselor. I'm not really sure what his status is, but he was very kind and kind of gave us pointers. And then also later on with one of my mentors slash sponsors who was a PGY2. So if you can find somebody who's already at the place or already in residency that can kind of help you, especially those that may have some background or are a part of the committee, that might be most ideal.
Yeah, and just to echo, I think it wouldn't be bad to like the night before your interview to just review your application quickly because they can ask about any and all of your activities. And I also like if it was a, sorry, it's my dog. If it's a specific school that you know that you want to go to, maybe, you know, just reviewing their website really briefly and being able to answer the question of why our program, you know, why our institution, how do you see yourself being a resident here, just because you will be asked specifically like why that program.
Great. I see a question about VSLO student rotation interviews. My understanding is most VSLO programs don't have interviews for away rotations. And it's more so based on the application, but I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. I don't know if anyone has anything to speak to VSLO interviews. No. Okay, great. I'll ask a couple more for the recorded session, and then we can move on to the other set of questions. So after all of your interviews, or I guess speaking of like letters of interest and letters of intent, can you speak to how you used either one of those? We can start with Juliette.
So I did end up sending the program I ranked #1 a letter of intent. I'm not really sure if it was necessary. A lot of programs, like there are some programs that came like straight out and told me during the cycle, unless you have a question, like don't send anything. And they're like, don't expect anything from us, like not like a subtle like love letter or anything like that. Especially in psychiatry, I think they're just trying to make it more like a more equitable and fair process. So I was told by a lot of places, like, you don't need to send anything, you won't hear from us, don't take that as a bad sign. I did not hear anything from Thomas Jefferson after my interview, and I still matched here very happily. So definitely like don't stress too much about letters of intent. I have heard it did work for some people. I heard some people didn't hear anything back. It's very hit or miss. I would say it's not a requirement though. A lot of people do stress about it. So yeah.
So I would say I used letters of interest and letter of intent. Letters of interest, I think, were particularly the way I used it as somebody doing couples matching was that we applied to all the programs, and then when like if he got an interview and I hadn't gotten an interview from that place, I might send a letter of interest to that program and let them know that my husband's being interviewed. And similarly, he would contact the program and say his program and say, my wife hasn't received an interview here, we're really interested in this school, could you let them know that she's waiting on a response? And that was something very scary for me to do, but it seemed to be effective, like getting interview invites on the same, like within a couple of hours of that email being sent out sometimes. So that seemed to be effective. The letter of intent I sent, like we both sent it to our #1 program. I didn't hear anything back. I didn't match there. So it didn't help me, I would say.
And maybe I'm an odd duck, but I didn't do either of them. But if you think you should, please do. Don't go off of what I did.
I just wanted to add, I did send letters of interest, which is like letters that you would send prior to getting interviews to say that I still want to get an interview, and I didn't hear back at all. And then I did send a letter of intent, and I got a response, and it was a very like strong response, and I did not match there. So some things to take into consideration as well.
That's great. I love the variety of experiences here. And I will just say for the recording too, the strong recommendation is that if you send a letter of intent, to only send it to one program. And that is a very strong recommendation, I think, across the field and across the community. So great. Thank you so much. We'll stop recording and we'll continue with the rest of the session.